The coffee was getting cold, while Colonel Brennan gestured at the woman standing near the supply closet. "She looks lost," he muttered to Major Henley. "Probably another contractor who wandered into the wrong building." The woman wore standard fatigues without visible rank insignia, her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She appeared to be examining maintenance schedules posted on the bulletin board. Major Henley glanced up from his paperwork and shook his head. "Third one this week. Security should keep civilians in the visitor area." He returned to his files while Colonel Brennan approached the woman with purposeful strides. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed situations where appearances can be deceiving in your community. The woman turned as Colonel Brennan's boots stopped inches from her position. "You need to be in the main lobby for visitor processing," he announced loudly enough for nearby personnel to hear. "This is a restricted area for authorized military personnel only." She studied his face for several seconds without responding. Her gray eyes remained steady while Colonel Brennan's irritation increased visibly. He crossed his arms and shifted his weight forward. "Did you hear what I said? Civilians need proper escort in this building." "I heard you clearly," she replied calmly. Her voice carried a subtle authority that made Major Henley look up again from his desk. "Colonel Brennan is tightened. Then you need to move along immediately." He pointed toward the exit with sharp emphasis. "The main desk will arrange proper visitor credentials if you have legitimate business here." The woman glanced at the maintenance schedules again before turning her full attention back to Colonel Brennan. Several enlisted personnel had stopped their activities to observe the exchange. Sergeant Mills paused while sorting communications equipment. Private Chin looked up from organizing supply requisitions. "I understand your concern about security protocols," the woman said evenly. "However, I believe there may be some confusion about my status here." Colonel Brennan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "The only confusion is why you think you can ignore direct orders from a superior officer. Your civilian status does not give you permission to argue with military personnel." Major Henley set down his pen and watched the interaction more carefully. Something about the woman's composed demeanor seemed inconsistent with Colonel Brennan's assumptions about her identity. The woman remained motionless while Colonel Brennan continued his verbal assault. "I can have security remove you from this facility immediately. Contractors and visitors follow orders without debate when addressing military officers." Sergeant Mills whispered to Private Chun. "She doesn't seem intimidated at all. Most civilians will be backing down by now." Colonel Brennan noticed the growing audience and raised his voice further. "This is exactly the kind of disrespect we get from civilian contractors who think they understand military protocol better than career officers." The woman's expression remained unchanged throughout his tirade. Her hand stayed clasped behind her back in a posture that suggested familiarity with military bearing rather than civilian uncertainty. The tension in the corridor thickened as Colonel Brennan's patience evaporated completely. His face flushed red while the woman maintained her unwavering composure. "You have exactly 10 seconds to start walking toward that exit," he declared through clenched teeth. Lieutenant Rodriguez emerged from the communications room carrying classified dispatch folders. He stopped abruptly when he noticed the confrontation developing near the supply area. "What's the situation here, sir?" he asked Colonel Brennan while glancing curiously at the woman. "Civilian contractor refusing to follow security protocols," Colonel Brennan replied, without taking his eyes off the woman. "She seems to think she can debate orders with military personnel." Lieutenant Rodriguez studied the woman more carefully. Her bearing and confident stance struck him as unusual for someone supposedly intimidated by military authority. Most contractors show immediate deference when confronted by field-grade officers. The woman shifted slightly and addressed Lieutenant Rodriguez directly. "Could you please clarify the current command structure for this facility? I want to ensure proper protocol is being followed." Colonel Brennan's voice exploded across the corridor. "You do not question command structure. Your job is to follow directions from authorized personnel, not conduct your own investigation of military hierarchy." Major Henley approached the group with growing concern about the escalating situation. The woman's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Colonel Brennan's increasing agitation. "Sir, perhaps we should verify her credentials before proceeding further." "Her credentials?" Colonel Brennan looked harshly. "She's obviously a contractor who wandered into the wrong section. Look at her. No rank insignia, no proper identification displayed, acting like she owns the place." Sergeant Mills continued observing from his position near the equipment racks. He nudged Private Chun and whispered quietly, "Something's not right about this whole thing. She's too comfortable under pressure for a regular civilian." The woman spoke again with measured precision. "Colonel Brennan, I appreciate your dedication to security protocols. However, I suggest you verify my authorization status before making assumptions about my presence here." Colonel Brennan's temper reached its breaking point. "Authorization status? You think throwing around military terminology makes you sound official? I've dealt with enough civilian contractors to recognize someone trying to talk their way out of trouble." Lieutenant Rodriguez frowned as he processed the woman's sophisticated understanding of military language and procedures. Her knowledge seemed unusually comprehensive for a typical contractor or visitor. Private Chin whispered back to Sergeant Mills, "Did you notice how she used his name without looking at his uniform? Most people would need to check rank insignia before addressing an officer properly." The woman remained perfectly still while Colonel Brennan continued his verbal assault. "Your little performance ends right now. Either you start walking toward the exit immediately, or I'll have you escorted off this base by security personnel." Major Henley stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, with respect, perhaps we should contact the duty officer to confirm visitor protocols before escalating this situation further." Colonel Brennan spun toward Major Henley with fury in his eyes. "Are you questioning my handling of security matters, Major? This civilian is clearly attempting to manipulate the situation by confusing lower-ranking personnel." The woman observed the exchange between the officers with keen interest. Her gray eyes tracked each person's reaction while her expression remained completely neutral. "You have 5 seconds, Colonel Brennan announced as he moved closer to the woman. 5 seconds to start walking, or I'll physically remove you myself." Captain Walsh rounded the corner, carrying morning briefing materials when he encountered the growing crowd near the supply area. His eyes immediately assessed the situation as Colonel Brennan towered over the composed woman. The aggressive posture and raised voices suggested a serious confrontation developing. "What's the problem here?" Captain Walsh inquired while setting down his folders. Several personnel had gathered to witness the exchange, creating an unusual disruption in the normally efficient corridor traffic. Colonel Brennan turned toward Captain Walsh with visible relief at having additional officer support. Finally, someone else who understands proper military discipline. This civilian contractor refuses to follow basic security protocols and submit to lawful orders. Captain Walsh examined the woman carefully. Her military bearing and confident demeanor seemed inconsistent with Colonel Brennan's description of a confused contractor. Most civilians show obvious discomfort when confronted by multiple uniformed officers. The woman addressed Captain Walsh directly. "Captain, could you please reference the facility's current command roster? I believe there may be some misunderstanding about authorization levels for personnel access." Colonel Brennan exploded at her continued resistance. "Misunderstanding? The only misunderstanding is your belief that you can question military authority. You're a civilian contractor who wandered into restricted areas without proper escort." Sergeant Mills whispered urgently to Private Chun. "She just referenced command rosters like she knows how military organizational structures work. That's not typical contractor knowledge." Lieutenant Rodriguez studied the woman's facial expressions during Colonel Brennan's outburst. Her complete lack of intimidation suggested familiarity with high-pressure military situations rather than civilian uncertainty about protocol. Major Henley approached Captain Walsh with growing concern. "Sir, the situation seems to be escalating beyond normal security procedures. Perhaps we should contact the duty officer for clarification before proceeding further." Captain Walsh nodded thoughtfully while observing the woman's composed reactions. Her ability to maintain perfect military bearing under intense verbal pressure indicated extensive training or experience with confrontational situations. Colonel Brennan interpreted Captain Walsh's hesitation as weakness. "Captain, are you seriously suggesting we need higher authorization to remove an unauthorized civilian from restricted military areas? This is basic security protocol that every officer should understand." The woman spoke again with calm precision. "Colonel Brennan, I strongly advise you to verify my credentials through proper channels before taking any physical action against my person." "Physical action?" Colonel Brennan looked harshly. "You think threatening language will intimidate military officers? We've dealt with hostile civilians before who try to use legal terminology to avoid consequences." Private Chun nudged Sergeant Mills again. "Did you hear how she phrased that warning? She talked about physical action against her person like someone familiar with military justice procedures." Captain Walsh frowned as he processed the woman's sophisticated language patterns. Her precise use of military terminology suggested professional familiarity rather than casual exposure to military culture. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped closer to Captain Walsh and spoke quietly. "Sir, something about her demeanor seems unusual for a typical contractor. Most civilians would have produced identification immediately when challenged by field-grade officers." The woman remained motionless while Colonel Brennan's anger continued building. "You want credentials? Here are your credentials. You're trespassing in a restricted military facility without proper authorization. That's all the credential information anyone needs." Major Henley watched the woman's reactions carefully during Colonel Brennan's verbal assault. Her gray eyes showed no fear or uncertainty, only careful assessment of each person's position and authority level within the developing situation. Colonel Brennan moved within arm's reach of the woman while pointing aggressively toward the exit. "Your time for cooperation just expired. Either you start walking immediately, or I'll demonstrate what happens to civilians who ignore direct orders from military officers." Master Sergeant Torres emerged from the operations center carrying encrypted communication logs when he noticed the unusual gathering in the corridor. His 23 years of military experience immediately recognized the signs of a situation spiraling beyond normal parameters. Colonel Brennan noticed Torres approaching and gestured emphatically toward the woman. "Master Sergeant, perfect timing. We need this civilian contractor removed from restricted areas immediately. She's been refusing lawful orders for the past 10 minutes." Master Sergeant Torres studied the woman's posture and bearing with the practiced eye of a career non-commissioned officer. Her stance exhibited the subtle confidence indicators he'd learned to recognize in senior military personnel during decades of service. "Ma'am," Master Sergeant Torres addressed the woman respectfully, "could you please provide identification or explain your business in this facility? We need to resolve this situation according to proper procedures." The woman turned toward Torres with what appeared to be subtle approval of his professional approach. "Master Sergeant, I appreciate your adherence to established protocols. Unfortunately, my identification is currently classified above the clearance level of most personnel present." Colonel Brennan's face turned purple with rage. "Classified identification? Now you're claiming to have security clearances? This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior we expect from unstable civilian contractors." Captain Walsh exchanged concerned glances with Lieutenant Rodriguez. The woman's reference to classified identification suggested familiarity with intelligence community procedures rather than typical contractor access levels. Master Sergeant Torres frowned as he processed the woman's statement about clearance levels. His extensive experience with classified operations made him recognize authentic terminology versus civilian attempts to sound official. Private Chin whispered to Sergeant Mills with growing excitement. "She just referenced clearance levels like someone who actually works with classified material. Most contractors don't understand how security classifications function. The woman addressed Master Sergeant Torres again with measured precision. Master Sergeant, I recommend contacting your communications center to verify current operational status before this situation escalates beyond recoverable parameters. Colonel Brennan exploded at her continued resistance. Operational status? Recoverable parameters? You think using military jargon makes you sound legitimate? I've heard enough contractor double talk to recognize manipulation when I see it. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped closer to Captain Walsh and spoke quietly. Sir, her language patterns suggest genuine familiarity with operational procedures. Most civilians wouldn't understand terminology like recoverable parameters in tactical contexts. Master Sergeant Torres nodded thoughtfully while observing the woman's reactions to Colonel Brennan's increasingly hostile behavior. Her complete composure under verbal assault indicated training or experience with high-stress confrontational situations. Major Henley approached Master Sergeant Torres with obvious concern about the escalating situation. Master Sergeant, perhaps we should verify her claims through proper channels before allowing this confrontation to continue developing. Colonel Brennan interpreted the growing hesitation among other personnel as insubordination. Are you all seriously questioning my authority to remove unauthorized civilians from restricted military facilities? This is basic security protocol that every service member should understand without debate. The woman remained perfectly still while Colonel Brennan's anger reached dangerous levels. Her gray eyes continued tracking each person's position and reactions while maintaining complete situational awareness throughout the developing confrontation. Master Sergeant Torres observed the woman's tactical awareness with growing suspicion about Colonel Brennan's assumptions regarding her civilian status. Her behavior patterns matched senior military personnel rather than confused contractor reactions. Colonel Brennan moved within striking distance of the woman while his voice dropped to a threatening growl. Your game's end right now. Either you produce legitimate identification immediately, or I'll physically escort you off this base myself using whatever force becomes necessary. Staff Sergeant Valdez hurried down the corridor, carrying urgent dispatch materials when she encountered the tense standoff near the supply area. Her eyes immediately registered Colonel Brennan's aggressive posture and the unusual number of personnel gathered around the confrontation. Colonel Brennan noticed Valdez approaching and pointed accusingly at the woman. Staff Sergeant witnessed this civilian contractor's complete disregard for military authority. She's been refusing direct orders and claiming to have classified security clearances. Staff Sergeant Valdez studied the woman's composed demeanor with growing curiosity. Her ability to maintain perfect military bearing under intense pressure from multiple officers suggested extensive training rather than civilian uncertainty about protocol. The woman turned toward Staff Sergeant Valdez with calm precision. Staff Sergeant, could you please verify the current chain of command notification procedures for this facility? I believe proper protocols are not being followed. Colonel Brennan's temper exploded at her continued resistance. Chain of command procedures? You think throwing around official terminology gives you authority to question military officers? This is exactly the kind of manipulation we expect from delusional civilians. Master Sergeant Torres stepped closer to Staff Sergeant Valdez and spoke quietly. Something about her knowledge base seems inconsistent with typical contractor training. She's using terminology that suggests operational experience rather than civilian exposure. Captain Walsh nodded agreement while observing the woman's tactical awareness throughout the confrontation. Her eyes continuously tracked personnel positions and exit routes like someone trained in situational assessment procedures. The woman addressed the growing group of military personnel with measured authority. I strongly recommend that someone contact the duty officer immediately to verify my authorization status before this situation escalates beyond acceptable parameters. Colonel Brennan laughed harshly at her persistent warnings. Beyond acceptable parameters? You sound like you think you're running some kind of military operation instead of trespassing in restricted areas without proper identification or escort. Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered to Major Henley with obvious concern. Sir, her reference to acceptable parameters suggests familiarity with rules of engagement protocols. Most contractors wouldn't understand those operational concepts. Staff Sergeant Valdez frowned as she processed the woman's sophisticated understanding of military notification procedures. Her precise knowledge indicated professional experience rather than casual exposure to military culture. Private Chin nudged Sergeant Mills urgently. Did you notice how she addressed each person by their exact rank without checking insignia? That suggests familiarity with personnel recognition rather than civilian guesswork. The woman remained motionless while Colonel Brennan's anger continued building to dangerous levels. Her complete lack of intimidation under verbal assault from multiple officers indicated extensive training in high-pressure confrontational situations. Colonel Brennan moved within arm's reach of the woman while his voice dropped to a menacing growl. Your time for games just expired completely. Either you produce legitimate civilian identification right now, or I'll demonstrate what happens to trespassers who refuse military authority. Master Sergeant Torres observed the woman's reactions during Colonel Brennan's escalating threats. Her gray eyes showed no fear or uncertainty, only careful assessment of tactical positioning and potential responses to physical confrontation. Staff Sergeant Valdez stepped closer to Captain Walsh with growing alarm about the developing situation. Sir, perhaps we should implement de-escalation procedures before this confrontation reaches physical violence levels. Colonel Brennan interpreted the continued hesitation among other personnel as weakness and insubordination. Are you all seriously going to let this civilian manipulate you with fancy terminology? She's obviously trained to confuse military personnel with official-sounding language. The woman spoke again with calm precision that cut through Colonel Brennan's verbal assault. Colonel Brennan, I am giving you one final opportunity to verify my credentials through proper channels before you take action that will end your military career permanently. Corporal Matthews approached the growing crowd while carrying maintenance reports from the motor pool. His eyes widened as he observed Colonel Brennan's threatening posture and the woman's unwavering composure under intense pressure from multiple military personnel. Colonel Brennan noticed Matthews joining the audience and gestured aggressively toward the woman. Perfect timing, Corporal. You can witness proper handling of civilian contractors who think they can manipulate military personnel with official-sounding terminology and false authority claims. Corporal Matthews studied the woman's bearing with confusion about Colonel Brennan's assessment of her civilian status. Her military posture and confident demeanor seemed inconsistent with typical contractor behavior when confronted by field-grade officers. The woman turned toward Corporal Matthews with calm precision. Corporal, I recommend you document this entire interaction for future reference. The events occurring here will require detailed witness statements from all personnel present. Colonel Brennan's face turned crimson with rage at her continued warnings. Witness statements? Document the interaction? You think threatening legal action will intimidate career military officers? This is exactly the kind of civilian manipulation we're trained to recognize and counter. Master Sergeant Torres stepped closer to Staff Sergeant Valdez and spoke quietly. Her knowledge of documentation procedures suggests experience with military justice processes rather than civilian legal understanding. Captain Walsh nodded agreement while observing the woman's tactical awareness throughout the escalating confrontation. Her eyes continuously assessed personnel positions and potential responses like someone trained in threat evaluation procedures. The woman addressed the assembled military personnel with measured authority that seemed to resonate despite Colonel Brennan's dismissive characterizations. I strongly advise everyone present to remember their oath of service and consider the consequences of supporting unlawful actions against authorized personnel. Colonel Brennan exploded at her reference to oaths of service. Oath of service? You think quoting military terminology makes you sound official? Every civilian contractor learns basic military language during orientation briefings. Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered urgently to Major Henley. Sir, Her reference to unlawful actions suggests understanding of military justice codes rather than civilian legal concepts. Most contractors wouldn't understand the distinction. Corporal Matthews frowned as he processed the woman's sophisticated knowledge of military documentation requirements. Her precise understanding indicated professional experience rather than typical contractor exposure to administrative procedures. Staff Sergeant Valdez observed the woman's complete composure under verbal assault from multiple officers. Her ability to maintain perfect military bearing suggested extensive training in high-pressure confrontational situations. Private Chun whispered excitedly to Sergeant Mills. She just referenced authorized personnel, like she actually has legitimate military status instead of contractor credentials. The woman remained perfectly still while Colonel Brennan's anger reached explosive levels. Her gray eyes continued tracking each person's reactions while maintaining complete situational awareness throughout the developing crisis. Colonel Brennan moved within striking distance of the woman while his voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Your manipulation tactics end immediately. Either you produce legitimate identification proving civilian contractor status, or I'll physically remove you from this facility using whatever force becomes necessary. Master Sergeant Torres stepped forward with obvious concern about the escalating situation. Sir, perhaps we should contact the duty officer before implementing physical removal procedures. Standard protocol requires verification of civilian status before using force. Colonel Brennan spun toward Torres with fury in his eyes. Are you questioning my authority to handle security matters, Master Sergeant? This civilian has been refusing lawful orders for 15 minutes while claiming false military credentials. The woman spoke again with calm precision that cut through Colonel Brennan's verbal assault. Colonel Brennan, you are about to commit an action that will result in immediate termination of your military service and potential criminal charges. This is your final warning. Technical Sergeant Price emerged from the communications center carrying encrypted message traffic when he encountered the volatile confrontation developing near the supply area. His experienced eyes immediately recognized the dangerous escalation between Colonel Brennan and the composed woman. Colonel Brennan noticed Price approaching and pointed accusingly at the woman. Technical Sergeant, excellent timing. You can witness proper military discipline being applied to civilian contractors who refuse to acknowledge lawful authority and attempt to manipulate personnel with false credentials. Technical Sergeant Price studied the woman's military bearing with growing skepticism about Colonel Brennan's assessment of her civilian status. Her confident posture and tactical awareness suggested professional military training rather than typical contractor uncertainty. The woman turned toward Technical Sergeant Price with calm precision. Technical Sergeant, I recommend you prepare incident reports for immediate transmission to higher headquarters. The events occurring here will require comprehensive documentation and investigation. Colonel Brennan's temper exploded at her continued warnings about documentation and investigation. Incident reports? Higher headquarters? You think threatening to involve command structure will protect you from consequences of trespassing in restricted military facilities? Master Sergeant Torres stepped closer to Technical Sergeant Price and spoke quietly. Her knowledge of incident reporting procedures suggests experience with military justice processes rather than civilian complaint mechanisms. Captain Walsh observed the woman's complete composure under intense verbal pressure from multiple officers. Her ability to maintain perfect military bearing indicated extensive training in confrontational situations rather than civilian uncertainty about protocol. The woman addressed the assembled personnel with measured authority that resonated despite Colonel Brennan's dismissive characterizations. I strongly advise everyone present to consider their responsibilities under military justice codes when witnessing unlawful actions against superior officers. Colonel Brennan's face turned purple with rage at her reference to superior officers. Superior officers? Now you're claiming military rank above field-grade officers? This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior we expect from unstable civilian contractors. Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered urgently to Major Henley. Sir, her reference to superior officers suggests she actually holds military rank rather than civilian contractor status. Most contractors wouldn't understand rank hierarchy implications. Technical Sergeant Price frowned as he processed the woman's sophisticated understanding of military justice procedures. Her precise knowledge indicated professional experience rather than casual exposure to administrative requirements. Staff Sergeant Valdez observed the woman's tactical awareness throughout the escalating confrontation. Her eyes continuously assessed personnel positions and potential responses like someone trained in threat evaluation procedures. Corporal Matthews whispered to Private Chun with growing excitement. She keeps talking about military justice codes, like someone who actually understands how they apply to different situations. The woman remained motionless while Colonel Brennan's anger reached critical levels. Her gray eyes showed no fear or uncertainty, only careful assessment of each person's position and authority within the developing crisis. Colonel Brennan moved within arm's reach of the woman while his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Your game's in right now. Either you produce legitimate civilian identification immediately, or I'll demonstrate what happens to trespassers who think they can intimidate military officers with false authority claims. Technical Sergeant Price stepped forward with obvious alarm about the situation escalating beyond recoverable parameters. Sir, standard protocol requires verification of personnel status before implementing physical removal procedures. Perhaps we should contact the duty officer immediately. Colonel Brennan spun toward Price with fury blazing in his eyes. Are you questioning my handling of security matters, Technical Sergeant? This civilian has been manipulating personnel for 20 minutes while refusing direct orders from superior officers. The woman spoke again with calm precision that cut through Colonel Brennan's verbal assault. Colonel Brennan, you are seconds away from committing assault against a superior officer. Your military career will end immediately, and criminal charges will follow within hours. Gunnery Sergeant Knox hurried down the corridor, carrying priority intelligence briefings, when he encountered the explosive confrontation near the supply area. His combat veteran instincts immediately recognized the dangerous tension radiating from Colonel Brennan's aggressive posture. Colonel Brennan noticed Knox approaching and gestured furiously toward the woman. Gunnery Sergeant. Perfect timing for additional witness to proper handling of civilian contractors who refuse military authority and attempt to manipulate personnel with fabricated credentials and false rank claims. Gunnery Sergeant Knox studied the woman's bearing with the practiced eye of someone who had served alongside officers in combat situations. Her confident stance and tactical awareness exhibited characteristics he recognized in senior military leadership rather than civilian uncertainty. The woman turned toward Gunnery Sergeant Knox with calm precision that seemed to acknowledge his combat experience. Gunnery Sergeant, I recommend you prepare detailed witness statements for immediate transmission to the Inspector General's office. Criminal charges will be filed within hours. Colonel Brennan's face contorted with absolute fury at her continued warnings about criminal charges and Inspector General involvement. Inspector General? Criminal charges? You think threatening investigations will protect you from consequences of trespassing and impersonating military personnel? Master Sergeant Torres stepped closer to Gunnery Sergeant Knox and spoke quietly. Her knowledge of Inspector General procedures suggests genuine familiarity with military justice processes rather than civilian legal understanding. Technical Sergeant Price observed the woman's complete composure under intense verbal assault from multiple officers. Her ability to maintain perfect military bearing indicated extensive training in high-pressure confrontational situations. The woman addressed the assembled personnel with measured authority that carried undeniable weight despite Colonel Brennan's dismissive characterizations. I am ordering everyone present to step back immediately and allow proper verification procedures to commence before this situation becomes irreversible. Colonel Brennan exploded at her use of command terminology. Ordering? Now you think you can give orders to military personnel? This is exactly the kind of delusional behavior that proves your civilian contractor status and mental instability. Captain Walsh whispered urgently to Lieutenant Rodriguez. Sir, her use of command authority suggests she actually holds military rank superior to field-grade officers. Most civilians wouldn't understand how to properly issue military orders. Gunnery Sergeant Knox frowned as he processed the woman's sophisticated understanding of Inspector General procedures. His experience with high-level investigations made him recognize authentic terminology versus civilian attempts to sound official. Staff Sergeant Valdez observed the woman's tactical awareness throughout the escalating crisis. Her eyes continuously tracked personnel positions and escape routes like someone trained in threat assessment and situational control. Corporal Matthews whispered to Private Chun with growing alarm. She just gave direct orders like someone who actually has authority over everyone here. That's not typical contractor behavior under pressure. The woman remained perfectly still while Colonel Brennan's anger reached explosive levels beyond rational control. Her gray eyes showed complete situational awareness while maintaining absolute composure despite verbal assault from multiple personnel. Colonel Brennan clenched his fists while moving within striking distance of the woman. His voice dropped to a dangerous growl that made several witnesses step backward instinctively. Your manipulation ends immediately. Either you produce legitimate civilian identification right now, or I'll physically remove you myself. Gunnery Sergeant Knox stepped forward with obvious concern about Colonel Brennan's threatening posture and clenched fists. Sir, perhaps we should implement de-escalation procedures before this situation reaches physical confrontation levels that could result in serious consequences. Colonel Brennan spun toward Knox with fury blazing in his eyes while his fists remained clenched. Are you questioning my authority to remove unauthorized personnel, Gunnery Sergeant? This civilian has been refusing lawful orders and manipulating military personnel for 30 minutes. The woman spoke with calm precision that seemed to echo with absolute authority. Colonel Brennan, you have exactly 5 seconds to step back and contact the duty officer, or you will spend the remainder of your life regretting the next action you take. The 5 seconds stretched like an eternity, while Colonel Brennan's face twisted with rage beyond rational thought. His clenched fists trembled with barely contained violence as the woman's calm ultimatum echoed through the corridor filled with stunned military personnel. 1. The woman's voice remained perfectly steady as she began counting down with the precision of someone accustomed to life-or-death timing decisions. Colonel Brennan's breathing became ragged while his eyes blazed with fury at her continued defiance. You think counting will intimidate a career military officer? This is exactly the kind of psychological manipulation we're trained to resist from hostile civilians. 2. Her gray eyes never wavered from Colonel Brennan's face while tracking his body language for signs of impending physical assault. Gunnery Sergeant Knox stepped forward with obvious alarm about the countdown, creating additional pressure on an already explosive situation. Sir, please step back and allow proper verification procedures to commence immediately. 3. The woman's voice carried absolute authority that seemed to resonate with combative veterans among the witnessing personnel. Master Sergeant Torres moved closer to Technical Sergeant Price with growing concern about Colonel Brennan's inability to control his temper under pressure. His clenched fists and threatening posture indicated imminent physical violence against the composed woman. 4. Her final number hung in the air like the moment before lightning strikes during a thunderstorm. Colonel Brennan's self-control shattered completely as his rage overwhelmed all military training and professional discipline. You arrogant civilian manipulator, he screamed while drawing back his right fist with deadly intent. The woman remained motionless as Colonel Brennan's fist accelerated toward her face with the full force of his fury and frustration. Her gray eyes showed no fear, only calm assessment of the inevitable consequences his action would trigger. His knuckles connected with her left cheek with a sickening crack that echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. The impact snapped her head sideways while blood immediately began flowing from her split lip. Absolute silence descended over the assembled personnel as Colonel Brennan's fist completed its arc and returned to his side. His chest heaved with exertion while his eyes remained blazing with uncontrolled rage. The woman slowly turned her head back toward Colonel Brennan while blood dripped from her chin onto her uniform. Her gray eyes showed no pain or anger, only cold calculation of what would happen next. "Holy shit," Private Chin whispered barely audibly to Sergeant Mills. "He actually hit her. This is going to be bad." Captain Walsh stared in shock at Colonel Brennan's complete loss of professional control. His 20 years of military service had never prepared him to witness a field-grade officer assault someone who might be a superior. The woman reached up calmly and wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. Her movements remained controlled and deliberate despite the physical assault she had just endured. Colonel Brennan stood breathing heavily while his fist still tingled from the impact. "You got exactly what you deserve for refusing military authority and attempting to manipulate career officers with false credentials." Gunnery Sergeant Knox stepped backward in horror at witnessing a superior officer commit physical assault against someone whose identity remained unverified. His combat experience told him this single action would have catastrophic consequences. The woman spoke with calm precision that seemed more ominous than any scream of pain or rage. "Colonel Brennan, you have just ended your military career and guaranteed your court-martial for assault against a superior officer." Technical Sergeant Price felt his stomach drop as the implications of her words registered fully. Superior officer. She was claiming actual military rank above Colonel Brennan's position in the chain of command. Lieutenant Rodriguez whispered urgently to Major Henley. "Sir, if she's telling the truth about being a superior officer, Colonel Brennan just committed career suicide in front of multiple witnesses." The woman wiped blood from her lip with deliberate precision while maintaining eye contact with Colonel Brennan. Her gray eyes showed no pain or anger, only cold determination as she reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a secure communication device. Colonel Brennan stared at the device with growing confusion about its official appearance and military specification design. What the hell is that supposed to be? Some kind of fake military equipment to support your contractor credentials? She activated the device with practiced efficiency while speaking in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the silent corridor. "Duty officer, this is General Patricia Hawthorne. I need immediate security response to Building 7, Corridor 3. Code Alpha Priority." The assembled personnel stood frozen in absolute shock as her words registered fully. "General." She had just identified herself as a general officer to the duty officer using official communication protocols. Colonel Brennan's face went completely white as the implications of her communication began penetrating his rage-clouded mind. "General? You're claiming to be a general officer? This is exactly the kind of delusional impersonation that proves your mental instability." Master Sergeant Torres felt his knees weaken as he processed what he had just witnessed. If she was actually a general officer, Colonel Brennan had just committed assault against someone holding flag rank. The communication device crackled with an immediate response. "General Hawthorne, this is Major Stevens at the duty desk. Security team is dispatched immediately. Are you injured, ma'am? Do you require medical assistance?" Her calm response silenced any remaining doubt about her identity. "Negative on medical assistance, Major Stevens. I require immediate detention of Colonel Thomas Brennan for assault against a superior officer. Also contact the Inspector General and notify General Morrison that I need to speak with him immediately." Captain Walsh stared in horror as the reality of the situation crashed down around them. She was actually a general officer, and they had all witnessed a colonel commit physical assault against flag rank leadership. Colonel Brennan began shaking as his mind finally grasped the catastrophic nature of his actions. His career, his pension, his freedom were all disappearing in real time as the consequences of striking a general officer became clear. Technical Sergeant Price whispered to Gunnery Sergeant Knox with growing panic. "If she's really a general, This entire base is about to be locked down while they investigate what just happened here. The woman continued speaking into her communication device with professional authority. Major Stevens, also contact the base commander and inform him that I need all personnel present in this corridor held for witness statements. No one leaves until the investigation team arrives. Lieutenant Rodriguez felt sick as he realized his own career might be affected by witnessing the assault without intervening. His failure to protect a general officer from physical violence could result in disciplinary action or worse. Staff Sergeant Valdez observed Colonel Brennan's complete psychological collapse as the reality of his situation became undeniable. His hands were trembling while sweat poured down his face despite the air conditioning. The communication device crackled again with urgent response. General Hawthorne, all requested notifications are being made immediately. Base lockdown protocols are being implemented. Security team arrival in approximately 90 seconds. Corporal Matthews whispered to Private Chun with absolute terror in his voice. We just watched a colonel punch a general in the face. This is going to destroy everyone's career who is standing here. The woman looked directly at Colonel Brennan while blood continued dripping from her split lip. Colonel Brennan, you are now under arrest for assault against a superior officer. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right immediately. Gunnery Sergeant Knox stepped backward as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. A general officer had been physically assaulted on their base while multiple personnel stood witness to the entire incident. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor as the security team approached at double time. Colonel Brennan stood motionless with his hands trembling while General Hawthorne maintained her composed bearing despite the blood still dripping from her split lip. 6 military police personnel rounded the corner, led by Master Sergeant Dixon, whose experienced eyes immediately assessed the situation. The sight of blood on a woman's face and the shell-shocked expressions of multiple witnesses told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the incident. General Hawthorne, Master Sergeant Dixon called out while approaching with professional respect. Ma'am, we received reports of an assault requiring immediate response. Are you seriously injured? General Hawthorne wiped blood from her chin while maintaining eye contact with Colonel Brennan. The injury is minor, Master Sergeant Dixon. However, Colonel Brennan committed unprovoked assault against a superior officer in front of multiple witnesses. Colonel Brennan's legs buckled slightly as he watched the military police surround his position. His entire military career was ending in front of his eyes while his pension and freedom disappeared along with any hope of avoiding court-martial proceedings. Master Sergeant Dixon nodded grimly while gesturing for his team to secure Colonel Brennan. Sir, please place your hands behind your back. You are being detained for assault against a general officer pending investigation and formal charges. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent corridor as Colonel Brennan's wrists were secure behind his back. His face had turned gray with shock, while sweat continued pouring down his forehead despite the cool air. You have the right to remain silent, Master Sergeant Dixon announced while reading from official cards. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court-martial proceeding. You have the right to legal counsel during questioning. Captain Walsh watched in horror as a fellow field-grade officer was arrested for assault. The sight of Colonel Brennan in handcuffs would haunt his dreams for years while he wondered how professional military discipline could collapse so completely. General Hawthorne addressed the assembled witnesses with calm authority. Everyone present will remain here until investigators arrive to collect formal statements. This incident will be thoroughly documented and prosecuted to the full extent of military justice. Technical Sergeant Price felt his stomach churning as he realized his witness statement would help end Colonel Brennan's career. The man had committed an unforgivable act, but watching his complete destruction still felt surreal and devastating. Master Sergeant Torres stepped forward with obvious remorse about failing to prevent the assault. General Hawthorne, ma'am, I apologize for not recognizing your rank and preventing this incident from escalating to physical violence. General Hawthorne nodded acknowledgement while dabbing blood from her lip. Master Sergeant Torres, you followed proper procedures given the information available. Colonel Brennan's actions were his choice despite multiple warnings about consequences. Lieutenant Rodriguez observed Colonel Brennan's vacant stare as the reality of court-martial and imprisonment became undeniable. His wife and children would suffer the consequences of his momentary loss of control for the rest of their lives. Gunnery Sergeant Knox watched the military police escort Colonel Brennan toward the exit while his career ended in the most humiliating fashion possible. 23 years of service destroyed by 30 seconds of uncontrolled rage against a superior officer. The corridor fell silent except for the sound of boots on concrete as Colonel Brennan was led away in handcuffs. His military career was over, his reputation destroyed, and criminal charges would follow within hours. Staff Sergeant Valdez observed General Hawthorne's professional composure despite enduring physical assault. Her ability to maintain command presence while bleeding demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned her flag rank. Private Chin whispered to Sergeant Mills with absolute amazement. She took a punch from a colonel and never even flinched. That's the kind of toughness you expect from general officers who earned their stars in combat zones. The distant rumble of helicopter rotors grew louder as 3 Black Hawks approached the base perimeter. General Hawthorne checked her secure communication device, while medical personnel arrived to document her injuries for the assault investigation. Within minutes, the corridor filled with senior officers as General Morrison, General Clark, and General Rodriguez emerged from the stairwell with grim expressions. Their presence immediately transformed the atmosphere from local incident to command-level crisis requiring immediate resolution. General Morrison approached with obvious concern about his colleague's condition. "Patricia, are you seriously injured?" The initial report mentioned assault, but minimal details about the extent of physical damage or required medical intervention. General Hawthorne touched her swollen lip carefully while maintaining professional composure. "The injury is superficial, Robert. However, the assault occurred in front of multiple witnesses and requires comprehensive investigation to ensure proper justice and maintain military discipline standards." General Clark observed the assembled personnel with the experienced eye of someone familiar with investigating serious misconduct. The shocked expressions and nervous energy indicated they had witnessed something extraordinary that would require detailed documentation. Master Sergeant Torres approached General Morrison with obvious anxiety about his role in the incident. "Sir, I request permission to submit formal apology for failing to recognize General Hawthorne's rank and prevent the assault from occurring." General Morrison nodded acknowledgement while studying the witness statements being collected by investigators. "Master Sergeant Torres, you followed appropriate procedures given the circumstances. Colonel Brennan's actions cannot be attributed to failures by other personnel." Captain Walsh watched investigators photograph General Hawthorne's injuries while documenting evidence for court-martial proceedings. The sight of a general officer being treated as an assault victim demonstrated how completely Colonel Brennan had destroyed his military career. General Rodriguez addressed the assembled witnesses with stern authority. "Everyone present will provide detailed written statements about the incident. Your testimony will be crucial for ensuring proper justice through military court proceedings." Technical Sergeant Price felt the weight of responsibility as his witness statement would help convict a field-grade officer of assault against flag-rank leadership. The truth was undeniable, but participating in ending another service member's career remained emotionally difficult. Gunnery Sergeant Knox observed the 3 general officers coordinating investigation procedures with professional efficiency. Their immediate response demonstrated how seriously the military treated assault against senior leadership regardless of circumstances. Staff Sergeant Valdez watched medical personnel document General Hawthorne's injuries with photographic evidence for court-martial proceedings. The swollen lip and facial bruising would provide undeniable proof of Colonel Brennan's assault. General Hawthorne addressed the assembled personnel with calm authority despite her injuries. This incident demonstrates the importance of proper identification procedures and professional conduct under pressure. Military discipline must be maintained regardless of personal frustrations or assumptions. Lieutenant Rodriguez observed the investigators collecting statements from each witness with meticulous attention to detail. Colonel Brennan's court-martial would be supported by overwhelming testimony from multiple credible military personnel. Private Chin whispered to Sergeant Mills with genuine admiration. She handled that entire situation like a professional despite being assaulted by someone who should have known better than to attack superior officers. The investigation team continued documenting evidence, while General Morrison coordinated with base security about implementing additional protocols to prevent similar incidents. The assault had exposed serious gaps in personnel identification procedures. Corporal Matthews watched the three general officers discuss consequences and policy changes resulting from the incident. Colonel Brennan's actions would trigger comprehensive review of security protocols and training requirements throughout the command structure. If you connected with this story about respect, recognition, and consequences in military service, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar situations where assumptions led to serious consequences. General Hawthorne concluded her formal statement, while medical personnel finished documenting her injuries. The investigation would proceed through proper channels, ensuring justice while maintaining the professional standards expected of military service members at every level.